Hello everybody. We are back on a Friday evening with yet another conversation from the trenches. And today we are going to be talking about a topic that's a little different. We are going a little out on the limb and talking about sex, sexuality, and its conjunctions with the physiology, psychology, and the spirituality. Now, I don't have much to introduce this topic because this is a learning curve for me. And I'm extremely grateful and I'm extremely honored to have one of my dearest friends and one of the best resources I know on the topic, Deepa Kannan. Deepa, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Rekha, and it's always pleasure chatting with you offline, online, all of it.
Yeah. Those who have been following our live will remember Deepa did a live with us a couple of weeks back. Deepa is a yoga acharya. She is an allied functional. Sorry, Deepa, I got that wrong. Can you just
Allied functional medicine practitioner, author, and yogini. like
I always twist my tongue on that, the allied functional thing. But I will
so does
say,
my mother. So does my mother. She has to ask me several times, "What's that title again?" Anyway, titles don't matter. End of the day, it's what we do and how we help people.
but I do want to say this. One of the reasons I trip on Deepa's titles is simply because of this. That Deepa for me is a healer. I have known Deepa for a very long time, and the one thing I know about Deepa is she's a very powerful healer. And what makes her very unique and very powerful, particularly in today's times, is the fact that she has her feet in two worlds, and she has so firmly entrenched in both worlds. She is somebody who blends ancient wisdom, the yogic traditions. She knows quite a bit about Ayurveda, and she brings in modern science. And for me, that is such a potent combination because she is somebody who also has not just the wisdom but the skill sets to blend both and offer very unique bio individual solutions for the body, mind, and spirit. And today we are going to be talking about sex, sexuality in the context of the physiology, psychology, and spirituality. Because in our last live, when Deepa mentioned it, we knew we just had to have, we knew we had to have that, take on that topic. So Deepa, any initial thoughts? Is there anything you want to add on? Tell the audience before we jump into the conversation.
I think, Rekha, just that we both, neither of us claims to be experts on sex as it is. We're
Yeah,
discussing it under the aspect of so many lenses today, but we can't
yeah.
claim to be. If someone is having challenges with sex or sexuality, then we are obviously not the right people for that. So I think we should bring attention to that, and we're going to explore it from very interesting lenses, which is physiology, psychology, mindset, and spirituality in the context of what do ancient texts talk about sex and sexuality.
Absolutely. I remember what you mentioned when we were talking about it, saying we are not judging, we are not labeling, we are only reporting what we know, or rather, I'm learning from you, so I'm going to chip in with very little, and you're going to be sharing much of your wisdom. And when I was preparing for this topic, I came up against myself, and I realized that the this whole barrier to sex and sexuality that is so buried within us, right? It's something that is very prevalent. It's very common. A lot of people tend to shy away from conversations about sex and sexuality. And this is more so for women, particularly in India and in the Asian context, right? So, given that we have an environment where most people are uncomfortable talking about sex or uneasy talking about sex, what are the implications for the individual's well being when the collective is reluctant to talk about both these topics?
Well, first of all, I think we should remember that the individuals make up the collective. So when one of us is feeling that way and we're thinking that it's taboo, we're part of that conversation on a
Yeah,
larger scale, and we're
yeah,
contributing to that taboo.
yeah,
And it's a lot like mental health. Wouldn't you agree that 10 years ago, mental health was a taboo topic?
yeah,
It was
yeah,
something, especially in India, that you couldn't talk about even visiting counselor or speaking to someone about your
yeah.
challenges with mental health, and that's changing a lot. However, that
Yeah.
still has a lot to go, and I think that's the same way. I mean, after all, and I must tell you this because I have a friend and a yoga student who was one of the key legal players in the LGBTQ verdict in India. So I would truly say that we have come a long way in
Yeah.
terms of sexuality.
Mm.
But I think that there is a lot of taboo within homes to discuss with partners, and
Yeah.
more so, as you mentioned, in India, being female is there is some aspect of women are always labeled as being
Yeah.
loose or anything if she's open about her sexuality. And I think
Yeah.
that is something which is worrisome, because if you go back to a lot of old texts of uh, Hinduism itself, they're
Mm.
replete with vivid descriptions about the sexuality of women themselves: breasts like pomegranates, eyes
Yeah.
like deer. I mean, there's vivid description about how women could be physically appealing to
Yeah.
somebody, very sexual in nature, and also, of course, vivid descriptions of sex and sexuality itself, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in the context of Khajuraho and Kama Sutra. And so I think that I don't know where we can't say where did that change, and what
Mm.
was that journey to coming into the space of taboo. However, I think I might play a little guesswork here, Rekha, that I think when we talk about individuals in the collective consciousness of
Mm.
sexuality, we
Mm.
must look at the fact that how we love ourselves plays a
Yeah.
big role in how sexual we can be
Yeah.
to anyone else. So I think, do we love ourselves enough? And that's
Mm.
where it all begins, especially for women, because maybe that's the missing link, and I'm just making guesses.
No, it makes a lot.
However, I must add that if you go back into Ayurveda or any ancient text, there's a lot of information that suppressing the sexual energy is very much linked to disease.
Mm.
And recent research, there's a lot of recent research which I wrote about in an article, that and people who suppress the sexual energy, they have higher, it correlates with higher rates of inflammation. And there
Mm.
was one research which was very interesting, Rekha, which looked at people who claim to be satisfied sexually, and they had higher release of antibodies, better
Mm.
white blood cell production. They had
Mm.
lower levels of cortisol, increased
Mm.
levels of oxytocin, lower levels of CRP, which is a major marker of inflammation. So I
Mm.
think all of that just correlated or understood that
Mm.
sexual energy is very much linked to our physical state of being.
Yeah. When you were talking about the ancient texts, I remember I did Malayalam. I learned Malayalam and Sanskrit in college when I was just about of my teens, and I do remember I reading quite a few of the classics in original text. And it was so amazing for me, the graphic descriptions. It was not erotic. It was just very organic. It was very organically woven into the narrative of what physical beauty was like, what sensuality was. And you saw some. The impression I always got was it was very organic and seamlessly woven into the life, right, into the thing. And I've often noticed that you mentioned Khajuraho, you mentioned Kama Sutra, and these are two words that keep popping up in almost every conversation about sex and sexuality. And I've noticed that it pops up in two contexts. One is Kama Sutra always pops up in the context of sexual pleasure. That's one space it pops up in, and then we also hear of it in the context of, oh, when did this become a taboo? Once upon a time, this was just a part of life, right? But I also noticed that a lot of times our conversations about both Kama Sutra and Khajuraho in the popular, in the mainstream or amongst most lay people, is restricted to just that. It doesn't go deeper, it doesn't go beyond the pleasure
Mm,
or the openness of talking about, or the
yes.
seamless integration of sex and sexuality in in our everyday lives, or in just our beings, right? And I was very intrigued when, in our last conversation, you very emphatically said sex is a very solid pillar in of health and well-being in the yogic traditions. And we didn't go down that path too deeply, because we said let's have a separate conversation about it. But now that we are having this conversation, can you share more about that? Because I'm really curious about it.
Well, I think you rightly pointed out about Khajuraho and Kama Sutra. I think, Rika, first of all, there is some misunderstanding about these two overall. So
Yeah.
I was graduating in fine arts in when I did my graduation, and and I was studying fine arts, and one of the trips was to Khajuraho.
Oh.
And what was very interesting to me was when we went to the temple, and there were these flood of men selling these little trinkets in the parking lot, and they kind of bulldozed me, and one of them showed me this very explicit keychain where they were intertwined, a man and a woman, and it looked as if they were having sex when he kept moving it in and out.
Mm.
And there was something very, it was not as sacred as Khajuraho
Yeah.
depicts,
Yeah.
and that was
Yeah.
what was a bit disturbing and bothersome to me. So I think first we should break down a little bit about what Khajuraho meant. First of all, it's a marvel of artistry.
Yeah.
So if you've
Yeah.
been there, it's so profoundly beautiful that you
Yeah.
really wonder how did they carve out that level of intricacy in the
Yeah.
sculptures.
Yeah.
But the main thing to understand is that the erotic sculptures which we so associate Khajuraho with, they're only about 10% of the entire
Yeah.
sculpture there.
Yeah.
Actually, the sculptures depict our whole life, and they are a depiction for the four goals of our human life, which is dharma, artha, kama, and moksha.
Mm.
And just to break that down very quickly, we don't want to go into this huge sacred discussion,
Yeah.
but dharma is, we say duty, but it's really what are we doing with our career? What are we doing with the role that we play in the world? Because that's our way to self express ourselves, our particular whatever we're good at.
Yeah.
Artha is how do we accumulate um,
Material.
material aspects which makes us have a sense of prosperity.
Mm.
Karma refers to how do we enjoy, how do we have pleasure, but not just sexual pleasure, but it's
Yeah.
all about all sensory pleasure. So it's also
Yeah.
about what do we feel good looking at, what do we feel good listening to. So it's all
Yeah.
forms of sensory pleasure. And
Yeah.
moksha again is a misunderstood word in ancient wisdom, because we associate it with something like enlightenment, but truly it translates as having a mastery over our life.
Yeah.
Just being in great control. So if you look at this Khajuraho, the 10% of sculptures, I mean, it depicts dharma, artha, kama, moksha.
Yeah.
So there's women combing their hair. There is
Yeah.
how people interact in a court. How do they
Yeah.
go out into the forest and have
Yeah.
war?
Yeah.
How are they in the temple? So there's so much more, and to break that down into just
Yeah.
sensuality is
Yeah.
itself. It's just showing us that sex is an integral part of how we have pleasure in life, but it's not the only thing. That
Yeah.
it's part of the various aspects that give us, bring us pleasure in life.
Yeah.
And of course, when we say Kama Sutra, now when we say Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, Kama Sutra literally translates into the thread or the text of sensory pleasure. And it's not all about sex again. It's
Yeah.
about how do we, it's a codification of how do we get sensory pleasure through various means, and sex is just
Right.
one part of it. However, all the texts do talk that sexual energy is a very potent energy. And I'll
Yeah.
go a little bit out on a limb and create a bit of a controversy here, Rekha, is to say, if you look all over the world in every religion, and
Yeah.
don't bash me anyone for saying this, but if anyone takes a really perceived religious path like godmen and have this outward mask of celibacy, we've seen a lot of times that backfires so badly, right? Because
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
forcing celibacy upon themselves, and then it
Yeah.
just backfires into various atrocious forms of
Yeah.
sexuality. So what the takeaway from that is that this energy is something that cannot be suppressed. It's
Yeah.
not so easy to go past. It's very
Yes.
potent.
Yes.
And to truly transcend that energy is true spirituality in the text.
Yes.
But nowhere does it say that you need to see the word
Abstain.
brahmacharya. People misunderstand it as celibacy, but it doesn't mean that. It means one who knows Brahman, which means one who is on a spiritual quest.
Right.
Right,
Right.
so we are kind of narrowing down Khajuraho and Kama Sutra, and I think there is a huge depth of information there. And it's also that sexual energy which births our ability to be creative in life, the ability to have enthusiasm for
Yes.
life.
Yes.
Anything that's potent, whatever we birth, and birth is not just babies, right? We could be
Yes.
birthing creativity, we could
Yes.
be having passion, zest for life. All of this comes under karma. And
Absolutely.
that's a very quick talk of Khajuraho and Kama Sutra.
Deepa, when you're telling me this, something that strikes me is it's very integrated. What we're talking about is a very integrated life, right? It's not taking aspects of our life in isolation and then trying to deal with that in isolation. For instance, when we talk about dharma, the way you have explained it, in today's world, particularly in thought leadership, the biggest leaders of the world talk about having a purpose in life. And that is
Yeah.
it's like, really, what are you here for? It has to go beyond just you, right? There's so much conversation about giving back and being, reciprocity, as they call it, reciprocity, not just giving, but also giving and receiving. We talk about present moment awareness, which is really about experiencing the moment with all your senses, your eyes, your ears, your nose, your taste. So, somewhere along the way, we've lost those definitions. And even today, I feel in a lot of ways, whether it's in coaching, whether it's in any help, any wellness domain, we are still not looking at an integrated approach to all of this. And frankly, we have to look at it as from an integrated lens to really be able to live a fulfilled life. I mean, I don't know a better word for it other than fulfilled life. But you know, let's just dive down a little bit more here, okay? Because I remember when I was trying to work out an outline for this conversation, I was really lost. I was like, what do I even ask Deepa? I have no clue about it. And you were very kind to actually set outline for this conversation and said, let's take it down this path because this is what makes the most sense. And the three areas that you highlighted to to steer our conversation was the physiology, the psychology, and the spirituality. Can I request you to share? Because I'm clueless here. I can make guesses. I don't want to make guesses. But can I request you to tell us more about the interlinkages between sex, sexuality, and these three areas, and the action and the interactiveness between these?
Okay, let's first break them down into each of those. So, when we're looking at physiology, we are looking at,
Mhm.
okay, what is sexuality? What is our ability to have sex? How does that show up, right? So,
Mhm.
that's our libido. And libido, in fact, even in the Ayurvedic text, libido is a way to gauge the state of health. How is the
Mm.
state of the body? And the same goes with modern functional medicine or science research. There's a lot of connection, that it's not simply just to show up and say, hey, let's get turned on. That's not how it works at all. And there's a deep physiological interaction between several hormones and our
Yeah.
body, which is actually triggering that what we call the urge. And
Yeah.
yes, we can try and precipitate that with how we look, how we dress up, how do we feel about ourselves. But if we were to break down physiology a little bit, and I'll try to first speak a little bit about women, little bit about men, and then maybe there
Yeah.
are some
Yes.
overlapping areas as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So for women, especially, physiology is a huge player in libido.
Mm.
And one of the biggest things in this is estrogen dominance. Now, estrogen dominance means that you're disproportionate with progesterone. So it can happen either that you're low in progesterone, which can also happen at a particular age. For example, right now I'm in that prime of perimenopause with crashing progesterone.
Join.
It can also happen if your liver's not working well and you're not able to detoxify estrogen. All of this can make you estrogen dominant. And estrogen and libido are like a seesaw. So if you're
Mm.
high in estrogen, your libido is going to be low. And which
Mm.
is why my form for clients has a question, how is your libido? Because it's going to tell you that if you don't have a libido, that you're probably high in estrogen, or
Deepa,
that you're
I'm going to ask you a
yes,
question. You
yes.
mentioned that you have this question about libido on your form for your clients. How many
How
answer it?
many do
How many
yes?
women answer that?
Actually, no,
I'm very curious
actually,
to know.
so the thing is that, we take great aim to keep confidentiality of our clients, which is why you'll rarely see us posting
Yeah.
testimonials or
Yeah.
anything, because that is something which is very, very important to us. So
Yeah.
every single person has answered that question
Great.
truthfully. And we
Mm.
talk openly about these things, because this is a way to gauge, as we do
Yeah.
the work, that if your libido is improving, it's a way to know that your hormones are getting better regulated. So
Mm.
estrogen, libido, that seesaw is definitely there. And the other
Mm.
thing is that if someone is having huge levels of stress, or
Yeah.
they're not able to cope with the stress, if there's high cortisol, then your body will take your cholesterol and produce cortisol instead of progesterone. And progesterone's really the sexy hormone. It's what actually makes us feel calm. It makes us feel not
Yeah. Yeah.
anxious. It makes us
Yeah.
feel very female. So
Yeah.
we need healthy levels of progesterone if we want to
Mm.
feel libido. And
Yeah.
if hormones are working in balance, and this is cultural evolution, Rekha, that if the body is working perfectly, women usually will feel a spike in libido just when they're about to ovulate. And
Yeah.
this is probably cultural, I mean, what kind of evolution, not cultural, but how the body has evolved
Yeah.
in a way, because it's preparing you to be fertile, it's preparing you to mate with your partner and conceive. And
Yeah.
let's not get bogged down that we're not saying everyone should make babies at that time, but
Yeah.
that's how it works, the physiology. So there's a spike in testosterone at ovulation, which is linked to feeling libido
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
women.
Yeah.
And some women don't always connect testosterone because they say male hormone, but that's the hormone which spikes at ovulation, which makes you have a libido along with estrogen.
Mm.
And then, of course, there's also the fact that if you're highly stressed and there's adrenal dysfunction, the adrenal gland produces cortisol to manage the stress. But therefore, if it's producing too much cortisol, it's also going to produce less DHEA, which is a hormone which is the precursor to testosterone. So your body makes testosterone from DHEA.
Mm.
So if you are having adrenal issues, highly stressed, you're going to have lower levels of testosterone. And women do have a decline in testosterone at perimenopause, and all of this is going to make her libido crash.
Right.
But there's lots that any woman can do to balance hormones and improve that. But I'm sure we're not going into that aspect today
So,
because
so
we're talking about sex and sexuality. And I have
yeah,
so much to talk about men and libido. So let's finish that before you maybe ask me the question, because
yeah.
male libido is. Do you want to ask me something right here before we go on to
No, no,
male?
no. Go on, go on, go on, go on.
So when it comes to male, again, men can be estrogen dominant as well, and this is
Yeah,
surprising to many people. And one of the
yeah.
ways you'll know that men are estrogen dominant, Rekha, is if they have what is called male boobs. So when
Mm,
there's breast development in men and fat deposition in the chest, which appear to be breast-like, that's a sign that there's low testosterone and high estrogen, and there's estrogen dominance. And of course, testosterone does drop with age and keeps dropping as men get older, and that's very much linked to libido. And if a
mm,
man has blood sugar issues or is insulin resistant, then it's then he's not really, because then cortisol elevation prevents that man from producing optimal testosterone, and therefore
mm.
libido crashes again. And
Right.
with high blood sugar, there's more inflammation. If there's more inflammation, they're not going to have vascular
Mm, mm.
dilation, which is what is called nitric oxide release, which is responsible for an erection, for a man to have an erection. That's why so much erectile dysfunction. And again, it goes back to if a man is under severe stress, and
Right.
there's adrenal issues, elevated cortisol, the same thing that happens to women, that the adrenal gland produces less DHEA, and therefore the precursors to testosterone is not there, and therefore low testosterone, and therefore no libido. So it kind of works quite similarly in men and women. And
Mm,
all of this can be true, Rekha, even for transgenders who've undergone hormone replacement therapy. So there can be shifts in libido because when someone is on HRT, their liver does take a big load. So if they're not doing appropriate things to support their health, then they can find the body is just trying to clean up the HRT, and therefore it's not able to really help them have a better libido. And then that can actually get lead
mm.
into psychological aspects as well, right? Because if
Yeah.
you
Mm.
struggle with, and I've had young girls, young meaning around 25, who come and who said they living with a partner and there's problems in the relationship because of their low libido, and it's all about their hormones.
Right. So, Deepa, I'm going to ask you a very basic, one of those sex questions for dummies kind of a question. But when we use the word libido, right?
Yeah.
How would you define libido? Just for us to understand high,
Okay.
low,
Yeah,
you know.
good, good. Yeah, so libido is just do we feel like we want to have sex? So if it's a
Mm,
man, it's the ability to feel aroused by seeing something, or I mean, it doesn't have to be another woman, but anything, just the
yeah,
feeling that you want to go and have sex with someone. And for women, it could be actual constriction in. As if like a mini orgasm, something
right,
that's
right.
happening in the vaginal tract.
Right, right. Okay, thank you for breaking that down because I think I like to get into the nitty-gritty. I like to be
Sure.
granular
Yeah.
with words because I think sometimes we assign meanings to words without really understanding what it means. And a lot
Yes.
of times, I know in conversations with women, and sometimes when they talk about their relationships, when they have what they call a dry spell, a sexual dry
Mm.
spell, they say, oh, this is normal, it will pass or it will not pass. And what you're now telling us is that could be a sign of deeper health issues that you need to look
Yes,
into.
yes. Yeah, yeah. I think it's a huge vital sign of what's going on within the body, and it tells us
Mhm.
so much, both
Okay.
men, women, and anyone else.
Right. So, given the tendency to push aside a dry spell or erectile dysfunction as, oh, it happens, right? What is the point at which people have to say, no, this is not okay, I need to get this checked out? Like, is there a,
Well, this is very tricky, Rekha, because really it goes back to what do we perceive is normal dry
yeah,
spell. Like, there
yeah,
can be
yeah,
people who don't feel anything for 5 to 6 months and then unruffled by that, right? I mean,
yeah,
maybe they've just managed that energy very well, or maybe they have other forms of intimacy. Sex is not the only way to be intimate,
yes, yes,
which is very vital to note
yes,
as well.
yes, yes,
So I think it really goes back to what is our view with that. Is that bothering us? So there's a world of difference between someone who's with a partner and they're both practicing probably a lot of meditation, lot of yoga, and they don't really feel like they need to be having a libido every so often, but it's different to a young girl who feels pressured that this is affecting her relationship, or a man who's made to feel by maybe a partner that the inability to, or if he has, and there was someone else who came to me, asked us very confidentially about her husband and erectile dysfunction, and I mean, obviously, they were unable to have an honest discussion among
yeah,
themselves, and that
yeah,
put a huge pressure on the relationship. So
yeah,
it really goes back to what is it impacting us psychologically and emotionally?
mm,
What is it doing for each of us? And if it's not doing anything to us and we're in a space where we can be intimate and connect in various ways, then I don't think that's a problem. However,
right,
if it's impacting you, if it's leading you to feel anxious or leading you to feel depressed, then I think that's the time that you should look beyond just the traditional approach. I remember, Rekha, a long time ago in newspapers, I can't recall where, there used to be a sex column by a sexologist,
I
Femina
think
or
I
something.
think I know
And
what you're talking about.
I'd
Yeah,
be so tickled by that as a
yeah,
child.
yeah,
But what I want to say is, I think we need to move away from
yeah,
thinking that we just need a sexologist to
yes,
actually looking at a healthcare practitioner who can look at your hormones, who can look at what's the
yes,
chaos, the metabolic fluctuation
yeah,
that's going on within your
yeah,
body, and first
yeah,
look at creating a sense of equilibrium within the body through various systems, and then half the time you don't need anything past that, because the libido just comes back when everything's in a state of balance.
absolutely. The reason I asked you this question is because I see a lot of conversation about what, and I think we spoke about it as well, that what is the right amount of sex for couples to have. And it's almost like a sword of Damocles around hanging over your neck. Like, say, you have to do this because this is a parameter to measure
Should
your
we
relationship.
talk about that? Because that's really important.
I
And I
think we
think
should.
that's,
I think we
yeah,
should
I
because,
don't think there's any right or wrong in this area, to be quite
yeah,
honest, because you'll see a lot of articles, mostly in the West, talking about if couples are not having sex 2 days a week, then you're disconnected or you're growing apart. And I think that's utter rubbish. And it's so unique, so different. And even Dave Asprey, the bulletproof man who's in the West, has suddenly realized the concept of ojas in Ayurveda and how excess sexual activity depletes ojas. And therefore, he's gone into these experiments of refraining from sexual activity for a certain period of time in order to preserve that ojas. So I think that is there a right way? No, I don't think there is. I think it's
yeah,
really unique. Obviously, a couple who's maybe just met and in their 20s is going to be having sex more often than maybe someone in their 40s or 50s. And it varies, right? I mean, it
right.
depends.
Yeah,
Have you met
yeah,
someone just now? And doesn't mean that if you've been with somebody for 10, 15 years and that 2 days a week has dwindled down to 2 days a month, that there's something wrong with the relationship. I think that
Yeah.
is where the problem lies.
I agree with you. I'm very glad you mentioned it because I think the a big part of our problem in not talking about sex and having this, the discomfort we as a collective have with sex is the fact that we look at it as just an act. And then we are using this act to actually define so many things about us and our relationships, which I don't think does us any good. But you mentioned that, this then leads to psychological. So can I invite you to just pick up the threads from there and carry on and tell us about the
Sure. I mean,
psychology?
I wouldn't claim to be an expert on that side. However, I do know that it's a huge source of anxiety and
Yeah,
depression in several relationships. And I'll go back to saying truly that when it comes to the psychology or a mindset about being able to connect with someone, it goes back to how do we love ourselves.
yeah,
And I think no one can make you feel like you're not beautiful enough. No one can make you feel, or rather, no one should make you feel like you're
yeah,
not sensual, you're not pleasurable. And I think
yeah,
you need to first realize that do you feel sensual? Do you feel like you're pretty? Do you feel like you're handsome? That's where it all begins, because if you don't feel good about yourself, you're not going to be able to want to connect with somebody
yeah,
physically. And
yeah,
our ability to even enjoy the sense of touch is linked to so many other aspects of, what is our adverse childhood experiences? Did we have trauma around sex? And that's a
yeah,
lot, that's a big piece. I
yeah,
don't think we can go into that today because it is a huge deal.
yeah,
There's so
yeah,
much of abuse, and
yes,
people, I mean, there may be such subtle incidents that they're
yeah,
left questioning, was that abuse? Like, family members who be touch them as
absolutely.
children
Yes,
inappropriately, and all of this is going to affect how do you react sexually, isn't it? And
yeah,
this is prevalent in huge areas in India. I mean, where people are unable to talk about, maybe it's the friendly next door neighbor, maybe it's someone in the family who's, and they're not even able to put words to that.
yeah,
And that is a big part of the psychology of sex. And I
yes.
think how can we connect with somebody?
Yes, no, I've met quite a few young women who have had problems with intimacy because of traumatic child sexual abuse. And that
Yes.
trauma was never addressed, the trauma was never spoken, the trauma was never vocalized, it was not seen, and they were internalizing so much of it in their bodies and in their minds without even realizing that they were internalizing so much about it.
Mhm.
So I mean, I completely get. So when you said the psychology of sex, the first thing that came to my mind were a few women that I had met who spoke about how they felt angry when they saw news of any sexual violence on the
Hmm.
media. They would actually
Yes.
articulate how they felt. I've had women who have told me that, oh, like uh, I just cannot. I just don't. I mean, it's not that I don't want to have sex, but when it actually comes down to getting intimate, yes, I
Fear of
freeze. I freeze.
memories.
Yes, I freeze,
Yeah.
and I don't know why my body freezes, and I know it's a head thing, but I don't know what to do about it. And it's very tragic. I've always felt it was very tragic that we don't create the space to talk about it because so many people don't have to suffer,
Yes.
right?
Yes, so true.
So do you wanna continue on with any more of the psychological conjunction,
Uh, no,
or
as
do you
no,
want to
I
move
think
to
that, yeah, I
spirituality?
think we want to go to spirituality because there's so
Okay,
much in the spiritual text, right? And
right. Yeah,
yeah. And as I said, yoga, and the first thing to note is everywhere you'll see the word brahmacharya, and that's usually misunderstood as celibacy. But coming back to sexuality, yes, of course, almost all our mythological texts have these vivid descriptions, like we said at the beginning, about the
Yeah.
sensuality of women.
Yeah.
And yes, Kama Sutra and Khajuraho do portray a lot about different ways to attain pleasure, which is what is depicted with different positions of sex. And that is something that is codified as a way to get pleasure. But however, what we need to understand, and this goes back to your question of how often, is the aspect of what is called ojas in Ayurveda. And ojas
Yeah.
is, just to describe ojas, what is ojas? So if you look at the three doshas, vata, pitta, and kapha, which are, vata depicts movement in the body, the nervous system, pitta depicts transformation, kapha depicts structure, muscles. But so these are all just descriptions for how we understand the energies in the body.
Hmm.
And they also give description to our individual constitutions. So each of
Right.
us could be different or combination. Now, if you say prana, tejas, ojas, they are subtle aspects of the same dosha. So prana is a subtler aspect of vata dosha.
Mm.
Tejas is a subtle aspect of Pitta dosha, and Ojas is a subtle aspect of Kapha dosha. But Ojas is very beautiful because it's what is our immunity, it's our ability to feel blissful. And when we say virus everywhere and are we safe from it, it's our Ojas that actually protects us from falling prey to something like that. Call it a reservoir of vitality or immunity.
Mm.
And ojas is very much spoken about in the context of sex, because it is said that excess sexual activity depletes ojas.
Mm.
And we have to think of something very interesting, Rekha, which I thought about when we were going to meet today, is that did nature plan it so beautifully that at a certain age, ojas starts to decline, which is why we get sick, which is why we feel longevity goes down, which means we start to age. And
Mm.
that's the same age that testosterone drops, that we get estrogen
Mm.
dominance. So,
Mm.
did nature plan that when ojas drops, that we just don't feel so sexual anymore?
Yeah.
And that, I mean, I was just doing a little bit of guesswork, but ojas is really bliss. It's vitality. It's how do we have enthusiasm. It's how do we have vigor, strength. And
Yeah.
usually you will see ojas is linked to, when you'll know that someone's having low ojas, if they're always impatient, always getting angry, always
Mm.
falling sick. They
Mm.
don't feel as sexual. So it is very integral with the sexual energy.
Mm.
However, it is said that excess sex can deplete ojas, which is what the texts talk about. And nowhere, if you're going to ask me what does the text say about how often,
What is
there
excess?
no,
Yeah.
this can vary. It can vary. Certain texts say that once a month is a great approach, but there's no right or wrong way for that. But
Yeah.
it is linked to our immune function and our vitality. However, we can improve our ojas not just by not by being conscious of how often we have sex, but also having a stable, balanced system, healthy digestion,
Yeah.
keeping ourselves low in stress. So there's lots
Right.
that we can do, but it is understood that, I mean, think about it. If we are doing something which is detrimental to our body, and then we're overindulging in sex, then
Yeah.
maybe it will
Yeah.
affect us. But that's not how it is. It's all about balance. It's how is the
Yeah.
body in a state of balance? How is the mind in a state of equilibrium? And then ojas, and there is nowhere that it says that people should not have sex. And that's where I think the problem, the
Yeah.
misunderstanding happens. In fact, a lot of the Ayurvedic texts talk about how sexual suppression contributes to disease. So there's a pathway which leads to it's a distribution channel of energy which supplies to the testes or to the uterus, and it is said that it gets blocked. The energy gets blocked when someone suppresses sexuality. That
Mm,
sexual suppression actually causes a blockage in those channels, leading to problems in the testes or the uterus.
mm, okay. Wow. So basically, a good way to approach this would be to listen to what your body is organically telling you and then follow that path rather than say, oh, I need to hold yourself to standards or to overthink it,
Yes, yes.
right? Treat it like anything you would create. Like if you paint and you enjoy painting and you feel that urge to create, it's pretty much the same. That you have that urge to, the body's telling you, or,
And
yeah,
like you said, physiology, psychology, spirituality, Rekha, I'd put them like 3 points of the triangle for
yeah.
all health and for sexuality. And I think they
Yeah,
really go together.
absolutely. I completely agree with you. So, as when I started out and when I stumbled on your titles, I said, for me, you're a healer who blends wisdom with the modern, ancient wisdom with the modern. And you are somebody who believes in the uniqueness of the individual in the body, mind, and spirit context, right? Now, clearly, what I'm getting at after this conversation, at this point of our conversation, is that there's a divergence. There was clearly a lot of holistic approaches that were practiced once upon a time, and that isn't really there. In a sense, what is coming across is a lot of concepts that were part of the past are being repackaged in different ways, but again as disparate concepts. Like we talked about dharma and we talked about karma and present moment awareness and all of that, right? According to you, since you blend both, how does this ancient wisdom and the ancient knowledge fit into our modern day life? Because the reason I ask this is because I have read some articles which said these were written at a time when the world was different, where things were not easy, when people did hard work, they went to the field, so it was relevant to that point in time,
No,
right?
I
So
disagree.
yeah, I've seen that
I
argument. I want to know what you think about its fit
Okay.
in our present day.
Oh, absolutely. I think, in fact, one of the things about most of these texts, including Ayurveda, is that it's a unchanging science. It's going to be relevant to anyone at any point in time.
Hmm.
And we must take that. And if we take even Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, what are they telling us? They're telling us Dharma is that when we're doing our duty, it doesn't mean we need to go for a paid job. It just means that what are you doing? What's your purpose, as you said so
Yeah,
rightly in the beginning? What's your purpose in life, which is allowing you to have self expression?
yeah,
However, if it's in excess where someone is working so much, then it can lead to violence in the quest for power, in walking over
yeah,
people to get
yeah,
to the top. And that's what was not advised. It was said that these things have to be in moderation and in a way that keeps you in equilibrium. So when
mm,
you say artha, when we say, no one's saying don't accumulate material
yeah,
aspects for
yeah,
pleasure, right? You should enjoy this life, and it just
yes,
should. If it tips over to the point of greed, then what will happen is you will never feel satisfied. You're never
yeah,
going to feel this is enough.
yeah,
You're always going to feel that, looking at the Joneses, that someone has something better than you, and that takes away your inner equilibrium. Same
absolutely.
goes with karma. When we say, no one's saying don't enjoy sensory pleasures, including sex, that it just shouldn't become that it's depleting you, and it's at the cost of everything else. That
Yeah,
this is all,
yeah,
as Khajuraho rightly teaches us, the sculptures of erotic aspects are just 10%. So that's one
Yeah.
part of our life, and
Yeah.
it's a very important part of our life, but it's not the only aspect. And
Yeah.
when we keep these three, this dharma, artha, and kama, in balance, then it means that we have moksha, which means we have a mastery over our life, where
Yeah.
we're able to stay in a state of equilibrium.
Right.
And if you said ancient wisdom, one more thing I need to say, Rekha, is that we cannot pick and choose from ancient wisdom. So we cannot
Yeah.
just choose one herb and say that it's going
Yeah.
to give you vitality. It's an
Yeah.
aphrodisiac. Now the
Yeah.
sexual physiology is a lot more complex than just taking an aphrodisiac at the moment.
Right.
If your body is severely messed up with low testosterone, low vitality, not feeling
Yeah.
great about yourself, estrogen dominance, and then you go and take something which is claimed to boost your libido at that moment, you're only going to put a further burden on your liver. I think we need to look at sex and sexuality as what are we doing on a daily basis that's going to keep us in a state of balance where we have healthy libido, which indicates to us how is our health at that present state of time. And we cannot break sex down into just the bedroom. Sex is
Absolutely.
way more than that moment just in the bedroom. It has to do with how are we connecting to our partner, how are we feeling about ourselves. There's so much wisdom in that sex can offer us in terms of a holistic view to life.
No, I think also the important thing is what does sex actually mean to you? Like for a lot of people, it is it about intimacy? Is it really about connecting, or is it just a physical act for you? Because we live in a world where there are a
You're,
lot of. No, I'm.
no,
I
you're going to spiral me into a long
No, don't
conversation.
please. No, 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 please don't. I'm just like highlighting that, we live in a world where sex is perceived as just the act, and there are so many consequences for all of us as a society because of that. Every now and then we hear of young children being, the boys room locker
Yes.
scandal we had
Yeah.
some time back.
Yeah.
Pornography, right? That is a problem. We have so many distorted associations and representations connected to sex and sexuality, the pushback against the LGBTQI community, right? There's so much of backlash, which is stemming from a space of imbalance, in my opinion. I think it's just
Yes.
a space of
Yes.
inner imbalance. That's where it comes from. But we're not going to derail down there because I don't think we'll come out of that rabbit hole then. Because both of us are very, very passionate about that. But I want to go back to something you just mentioned, which was about how do we integrate our sexual well-being into in a holistic way in our everyday life. And I remember in our last conversation, you mentioned about the importance of having a daily routine, or you called it a dinacharya, right? Anyway, I have to tell you this. After that, using, I've started using oil on my body. I've started doing abhyanga every single day instead of 3 times a week.
Lovely.
So I
Lovely.
have to tell you that. But since you'd mentioned the Abhyanga, I mean, you had mentioned the Dinacharya, and you'd mentioned
Dinacharya.
the daily routine. How do we incorporate sex and sexuality and well-being from that perspective into our routines?
I think first of all, the dinacharya we build for ourselves is going to be very helpful to sexuality, right? So it's
Mm.
going to help us stay in a state of physiological balance. So when we're doing abhyanga every day, we're
Yeah.
actually lowering cortisol, we're increasing oxytocin, and that's exactly the chemistry that's required to
Ah,
have sex,
there you
right?
go.
It's going to
Right.
lower cortisol, and lowering cortisol is going to boost your body's ability to produce sex hormones, which is progesterone, estrogen, women, testosterone, and estrogen in men. And so that is going to be a big part of that whole physiological balance.
Hmm.
And if we do anything that's going to help our liver, which means that we don't consume bad fats. We don't consume high sugar. We keep, and Rekha, one of the biggest things I see with clients is fatty liver. Almost everyone comes with a fatty liver. So if
Mm.
someone has a fatty liver, they're not going to be able to metabolize the sex hormones. So therefore, they're going to be estrogen dominant. They're going to have imbalance between estrogen, progesterone, estrogen, testosterone. So all of this. And what can we do every day that's going to keep our stress levels down? And here's where I want to say that even very health conscious people will usually go and sit in meditation only when they have some calamity that's going on. And that's not
Yeah,
the way that we deal with stress.
yeah,
We need to stop using stress resilience techniques as SOS situations, and we need to move into a state where we're doing something on a daily basis every few hours, where we take a pause,
yeah.
spend 10 breaths taking deep breaths to slow down, calm down the nervous system,
Mm.
and maybe walk out in nature, hang on a hammock like I did yesterday.
Yeah,
Anything that just helps us to calm down deeply. And I think it's very important that we take effort in how we look.
yeah.
Because that's not for somebody else, but it's just for
For
how
ourselves.
we feel. Because I see a lot of people making loose remarks to people, even their own children, that don't be shallow. Why are you focusing on your skin? So
Yeah,
what if there's pimples? I
yeah,
mean, this is so linked to our confidence. It's so
yeah,
linked to how do we feel vibrant. And remember that how you look, whether and ojas. Okay, let me finish by talking about ojas, because ojas is linked to having glowing skin. You
yeah,
can tell when someone has a lot of ojas, when their skin is shining and their
yeah,
eyes are sparkling. They've got this vibrant energy, and so this is not shallow. It's reflecting the
yeah,
state of our inner health, our skin, our eyes, our hair. These are all markers by which we can tell whether our body's in a vibrant state of health. So I think we can do all of this to really support healthy sexuality,
yeah,
eating a clean diet, taking care to reduce stress. And I would put stress as the biggest piece in sexual
yeah.
behavior, because when stress is high, sex hormone output is going to be compromised.
Hmm. You mentioned the fatty liver, right? So how can we, I mean, just because you mentioned that a fatty liver cannot process sex hormones efficiently, how does one counter that on a day-to-day basis? Because clearly that's a day-to-day
Well, first
something.
of all, don't put trash in the system. Don't, if you're going to be having several cups of alcohol every night, and if you're going to be having desserts and sugars on a daily basis, if the diet is predominantly high sugar. And the sad part in the world is the misunderstanding that when you have elevated cholesterol levels, that you need to be on statin. What the elevated lipids usually show you is that you've got liver issues, and
Yeah.
that you are eating a high sugar diet, you're having a high state of inflammation.
Hmm.
And every little lab marker on you, we could probably go into every lab marker and tell if someone's going to have a libido or not.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. So it's basically just eating clean, eating
Eating
clean,
clean, yeah.
you know.
Taking care of not putting heavy to digest fats.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
not to
Yeah.
say a low fat diet is good either.
Yeah.
One of
Yeah.
the biggest reasons for low OJs again is a low fat diet. So I know that it's very popular today, where it's a diet where you are very low on fat and more plant based. And the plant based aspect is great, but if it's a low fat diet, it's highly detrimental, because from the science perspective, your body cannot produce estrogen, progesterone and testosterone if you don't give it the building block, which is fats. um,
Right.
and Low fat diet is the trigger for low OJs. So we want to be including very healthy healthy fats. So don't be scared of adding 2 tablespoons of ghee into every single meal.
Yeah, whatever is, I think maybe whatever is local and
Yes.
what you're grown up
Yeah,
with.
whatever works, coconut oil, ghee,
Yeah,
anything, but the
yeah,
healthy fats.
that is important. Right. Okay, so I think we've had a really long and nice conversation. So before we wind up, any last words for the audience? I can see a few people are watching, but everyone's very quiet. So I think
I
you've
think
given
it's
us
the,
a
I was
lot,
just,
you've given a
I
lot
was,
to think about
I
and
think it's
process.
also, come on, whoever's watching, don't be shy. This is how we
Yes,
break the taboos of sex and
yes,
sexuality. You need to be
yes,
participating and asking a question. I
yes,
expected this, Rekha, and I was going to tell you, and I'll bet that this is a conversation with people will go back and watch silently, but they'll be scared to show the world that they're watching. Please don't be like that, because this is really all of us working to change the taboo. And I truly believe, on final note, I should just close by saying that our sexuality is a way to look at our own state of body, mind, and spirit.
absolutely. I would add on to that and say that, you know what, for me, after a very long time, I arrived at this point of saying that as the whole purpose of my human experience is to experience the human experience fully, completely, deeply in each moment. And we cannot do that if we are busy, if we are busy far too. Deepa, there's a comment there for you. So,
Oh, lovely. Thank you, Frederick, for coming and boldly saying that. Your words are much cherished.
thank you, Frederick. So I'm just going to say that we owe it to ourselves to accept all parts of ourselves. And it's only when we accept all parts of ourselves that we can truly accept, we love ourselves. We cannot love ourselves if we are repressing parts of ourselves or editing part of ourselves. And sexuality is a very, very important part of it. And I hope many more of you who are watching and listening will find this conversation useful, that there will be takeaways for you. Just in case you would like to pick it up one on one with Deepa, Deepa's, her pages, her details are on this post. And even if you comment or even if you message her one on one, she's very quick to respond. She's on Facebook, she's on Instagram, she's on LinkedIn, and she's tagged on all of my posts on all social media. So please do feel free to reach out to her. As I've said, Deepa is perhaps one of the finest and the most powerful healers I have met. Okay, Frederick has a question.
And one more thing, yes, while Frederick asks his question, Rekha, I must also say that pleasure is not just about the sexual activity itself.
Yeah.
Pleasure and intimacy is also about enjoying the sense of touch by having
Yes,
a bath together,
yes,
or
yes,
just,
yes,
kissing
yes,
each other while going up
yes,
and down the stairs. It's not
yes.
only about the sexual activity. So we must recognize that we can take pleasure in so many forms through the day. It's not just about that.
Absolutely. I think intimacy is such a powerful part of human connection. And it's not just with our partner, it's with everybody. Like, you meet
Yes.
somebody, you want to hug somebody, that touch, the feel, the conversation is it's very important. And we have to, okay, so Frederick has a question for you, Deepa. It says,
Okay, I can see it. It seems to me that sexuality can be tiring for a man, but it's very energizing for a woman. I'm not sure about that, Frederick. It's possible, but I think if you're referring to the fact that men feel sleepy after having sex, that can be due to release of prolactin in the brain, which and of course the depletion of ojas at that moment. And I'm not sure about this, so I will probably say that we need to question this. Great question, though, that we should probably go back and look at it.
yeah, but I don't know.
But however, Frederick, I will add that the texts do say that there is depletion of ojas, and vitality drop for both. Yes,
So
yes, both for women and men.
yeah.
You're
So
talking about if women feel energized after sex. In the text, Frederick, you could be referring to how Tantra uses sex as a tool for elevation, where, right at the point of climax, men and women know how to reverse the energy flow rather than me moving it in a downward force. They use that unification of male and female energy to lift it up and raise Kundalini. So they're working together. I'm not sure if you're referring to that, but this is probably a longer conversation.
yes, it was very interesting, Frederick, that you we have gone down this road because Deepa and I did speak about it before we came on. And yeah, he is talking about Tantra, by the way. So
Yes,
we did have
yes.
a conversation. Deepa,
So I will tell you, Rekha, that you need to invite. So Frederick, my husband Sham, he lived in the Himalayas with his master in a cave for 2 years, and he was initiated into Tantra and Tantric Kundalini meditation. So I did tell Rekha that she should invite him and talk about Tantra, and I'm not the right person, but good question, and maybe your words will inspire Rekha to have that conversation with Sham.
I absolutely will. I will have Sham on to have a conversation about Tantra because I mentioned to you, Deepa, that one of the things that really gets my goat is the over sexualization of Tantra in social
That's
media. And
not. That is
I
not
know,
tantra.
I
That
know,
is a bastardization of tantra. I'm sorry
I
to say.
I know, but that was my point, and I that's a whole conversation that I would like to have separately with Sham and get to pick on his brain. So
Yes.
folks, keep an eye out. We will have Sham on at some point during the lives. And Frederick, thank you again for asking those questions, for actually bringing us to this point, because we've actually gotten our point about what we feel about, as Deepa said, the distortion of Tantra in the mainstream, as we see it in the mainstream today.
And on a funny note, Rekha, when people see on our website, in fact, Sham had to take down the section where he had written something about Tantra, his background with Tantra, and we used to keep getting calls saying, is only Deepa available for Tantric yoga? And it was so creepy to me. uh,
No, I understand where I understand that because I've seen some, I've received certain comments which really got my hackles up, because for me it's all sacred. It's very, very
yes,
sacred. And the minute the
yes.
sacredness is not treated with the reverence that it is owed, it bothers me. So anyway, I think we've had a really great conversation. Thank you everybody who's watching. Frederick, thank you